Anavar is a drug, right? It's a very mild drug, anabolic drug, and they've studied it in burn victims, and it does great for burn victims. And they've studied it in teenage burn victims. And when they did, all the kids in the study had more muscle mass, and their penis got longer, like grew in length. And so how do you tell kids not to take Anavar?
And I just want to know, when does that door close?
And I don't know.
When does that door close? Clearly that door closes at some point. Otherwise, we would know.
We need a more plates, more dates video on this.
Can you imagine if you're the one that discovered, actually it carries clear into your 70s?
I'm going to have to ask Derek to make a video. Because he can explain it, for real. He would probably know. Probably know all the studies and everything.
Really, if we've ever needed
it'd be a really fun video. Maybe this video we could put up and then he could respond to it.
Derek, let us know.
What's up, guys? Derek, moreplatesmoredates.com. The Delta Lord bat signal has been put up, turned on. I don't fucking know, but I've been called into action, bro. The Chris Bell Show has made a Instagram reel about Anavar's effects on penis size, and I got tagged out the wazoo. He basically asked me to make a video on it in the video, and then in the comment section, a bunch of people are tagging me. It's right up my fucking alley, dude, you know? We got to talk about it. So, the Chris Bell Show. In studies of teens with I'll just play the clip and then I'll read the caption after.
Anavar is a drug, right? It's a very mild drug, anabolic drug, and they've studied it in burn victims, and it does great for burn victims. And they've studied it in teenage burn victims.
All right, so Anavar, like you guys are probably pretty familiar with it, is a compound that is very hard to source, actually, in the underground scene. It's one of the most progressive and refined anabolic agents. It was one of the last ones. I think Primobolan might have been the last anabolic agent that was developed in a pharmaceutical setting, but Anavar was definitely up there as far as tissue selectivity, as far as its tolerability from a side effect aspect. It's very, very benign on hepatotoxicity markers. It's uniquely metabolized mainly through the kidneys, which is odd as opposed to other hepatotoxic methylated 17-alpha alkylated oral steroids. It's one of the go-to safe, not safe, but safe, anabolic agents, and often used by women thinking it is female friendly, which is not necessarily the case whatsoever. But the design of it was with this application in mind to be used in a clinical setting in the elderly, in the androgen sensitive, in females, in children. It needs to be widely usable, not something that is going to viralize the fuck out of somebody. So that is why they try to differentiate the androgenic component from the anabolic component, and that is where the development and clinical utility of things like SARMs come into the equation, and why that field of medicine is so not heavily researched, because it actually basically are cut off when it was back in the Olympic scandals decades ago. But at the time, the need for it in a clinical setting is very, very obvious, to have anabolic agents that can retain lean mass, that can preserve bone mineral density, all of these things without the androgenicity viralizing side effects that traditionally come from base testosterone. So it's not like you can just, if you have a teenage burn victim or a female, a woman that needs, some sort of anabolic support, you can't just put her on a fuck ton of tests. You're going to turn her into a dude, essentially. So, as you would expect, they tried to segregate the anabolic component unsuccessfully, but to a much greater degree than was otherwise present in just standard testosterone, which has a 1-to-1 anabolic to androgenic rating, which ultimately those ratings are kind of fucking stupid to begin with, because they are not accurate whatsoever and are based on rodent Hirschberger assays. But because obviously Trenbolone is not 500 to 500, 5 times more anabolic and 5 times more androgenic milligram per milligram than testosterone at 100 to 100. It doesn't fucking work like that. These ratios are kind of just ballpark metrics based on rodent data. But at the end of the day, the goal of every anabolic agent that was developed was to basically improve its tissue selectivity, anabolic, preferential anabolic activity relative to androgenic. And Anavar was one of the most successful at not achieving it, but getting much further away from the viralizing like testosterone that a female would only produce like a handful of milligrams per week before they start to get into viralizing territory, basically eliminating it as a viable intervention for catabolic, support, essentially, like to prevent the catabolism during like, burn patients or something.
And when they did, all the kids in the study had more muscle mass and their penises got longer, like grew in length. And so how do you tell kids not to take Anavar?
And I just want to know, when does that door close?
And I don't know.
When does that door close? Clearly that door closes at some point. Otherwise, we would know.
We need a more plates, more dates video on this.
Can you imagine if you're the one that discovered, actually it carries clear into your 70s?
I'm going to have to ask Derek to make a video.
So like, obviously, I'll finish the clip first.
Because he can explain it for real. He would probably know. Probably know all the studies and everything.
Really, if we've ever needed
It'd be a really fun... Yeah, it'd be a really fun video. Maybe this video we could put up and then he could respond to it.
Derek, let us know.
And here I fucking am, bros. Quick note from Magic Spoon Bros. This is the cereal company as well as cereal protein bar company that we all know and love. This is the company that I've been buying their stuff even before they sponsored the channel. I've talked about them multiple times, and they've been one of the longest standing supporters of the channel as well. Obviously much appreciated when you guys mutually support them, which supports me and indirectly helps bolster the channel growth essentially. But as far as why I like their stuff, high protein, 13, 14 grams of complete protein per serving, low carb. It is literally 0 grams of sugar, gluten-free, grain-free. It's also naturally sweetened with monk fruit, inulin, allulose. How they made it taste within striking distance of childhood cereals with natural sweeteners, I fucking have no idea, to be honest, but they managed it. Like this, you could put Fruit Loops in front of me and that in front of me, and I'd be pretty on board with both. They're, relatively similar, to be honest, to a point where I might not be able to discern which one's even better. Except for this one is not going to give me severe brain fog or fuck me up from horrible macronutrient profile aspect that is totally void of any protein. This, you're concurrently hitting your protein needs while having a calorie-friendly, sugar-free cereal, and you don't need to double up on your calories then to get your protein in. Whereas with cereals previously, if I want to have a bowl of Frosted Flakes, for example, I then need to down a protein shake after, whereas with this, not the case. I would get my protein in simultaneously with very good tasting cereal that would not break the bank in calories, get my protein in simultaneously, and would not give me vicious brain fog that would plague me for the rest of my workday. So that is nice. And as well, these things I've become pretty obsessed with. These are their new protein bars. They come in multiple flavors like cocoa peanut butter, cookies and cream were the original two that released, and then they came out with, this was the original two they came out with. Pretty fucking solid flavors. And then they came out with recently, I talked about this last time I talked about them on the channel. I finally got them, cinnamon roll, as well as s'mores. And the s'mores ones, in my opinion, are the best ones. They're fucking absurd. I've been eating them nonstop, to be honest. I think I plowed through 5 boxes, actually more, probably 7 or 8 boxes in the last month. It's probably, I'm overdoing it, to be honest. I wouldn't eat that many, but because again, these are snacks, things to replace, junky alternatives. Don't base your entire diet around them, but they're pretty fucking good. And if you're going to be cheating, these are the healthy cheat foods, in my opinion. So you can check it out, and you can use coupon code Derek at the checkout menu to save $5 off, and go through the link in the description below, magicspoon.com/Derek, to save $5 off your order. And also, you can get Magic Spoon in Canada and the UK now. If you didn't know, I used to literally drive over the border to pick this shit up at my P.O. box. No longer necessary. If you're Canadian, ships right to your door. So you can check it out, supports me, and back to our regularly scheduled programming. So comment section, Huberman at the top. DHT sensitivity of all of the relevant tissues lasts a lifetime, but the primary determinants of appendage growth cease around age 25. More to discuss here if you want to. Me. Hotchkiss from Merrick Health, shout out. There's been DHT creams used with success in micropenis, but those gains tend to dissipate after puberty. The other thing that young men should know is that Anavar will suppress your natural test, but does not aromatize. You may feel good for a few weeks on it, but be in a world of hurt with such low testosterone and estrogen of taking Anavar alone. This isn't only mechanistic. I've seen it numerous times in practice. 25, come on. Mark Lobeliner, I took Anavar and still have a small penis. Crying emoji. Fuck, sucks, bro. Funny guy. Mark's dope though. Check him out. I'm assuming the penises didn't get burnt then. Seriously, unless you have an extreme circumstances, No 14-year-old should be on any anabolic, no matter how mild it is. I do believe steroids like Anavar work great for cancer patients, burn victims, and people diagnosed with sarcopenia, but a healthy 14-year-old shouldn't be on gear at all, just my opinion. Guerrilla Chemist. So a lot of action in the comments here, and a lot of more plates, more dates tags. Spectacular content. I took 6 doses in a week, and now I can't walk. Everyone calls me Jake the Peg with the extra leg. Yeah, so anyways, what do I think? Basically, this was about studies of teens with uncomplicated growth retardation. The anabolic steroid Anavar made a significant difference in the length of these subjects' penises. First of all, who's doing the measuring? Secondly, how do you tell a teenager that wants to get jacked not to take it? I don't think young people should ever use steroids, mainly because of the emotional burden it puts on a young, unformed brain. Steroids can help people get stronger, but without a strong mind or strong grind, you'll never reach your peak. Steroids can be part of the answer, but as I've learned since Bigger, Faster, Stronger, that will never be the answer. So by the way, if you haven't seen Bigger, Stronger, Faster, epic movie, definitely go check it out, by Chris Bell. So anyways, what do I think? This study was, I believe, the one in question, the effects of oxandrolone on genital development in uncomplicated growth retardation. So now, how do you tell somebody, not to take it? What's the downsides here? Like, first of all, Anavar is one of the hardest to source drugs. It's like one of the most expensive to procure as a underground lab, which presumably is going to be where 99% of people are trying to get it, is through the same underground labs they would access, testosterone, trenbolone, etc. You're not going to get pharma-grade Anavar. It is not produced anywhere other than compounding pharmacies, as far as I'm aware at this point, and even then, the actual utility for it is few and far between, and generally not justified. There are some clinics that seem to haphazardly prescribe it across the board to people that aren't don't really need it necessarily, but in general, it's going to be pretty fucking hard to come by, and even if you do come by it in an underground capacity, the likelihood that it's going to be legitimate is very low. It is widely faked. It's faked with things like Winstrol, I believe, is a common one, and it is not something that, in general, most people are not going to get legitimate Anavar, so it's not something you can just easily access and assume it is of high quality. So do you think a teenager is going to be connected enough to even Do I think most teenagers are going to be connected enough to even get high quality Anavar that is actually Anavar to begin with? Highly unlikely. So that is a huge deterring agent in itself, is the likelihood that you're going to get the right compound is low. You're probably going to end up with something else, something that you don't want. But again, is this, context dependent? Is this something you even would want, even if you could get access to high quality, legitimate shit? Let's look at the actual study and what happens here. This is a really old one. This is presumably the one we're talking about. Anavar therapy of children with uncomplicated growth retardation caused a marked increase in penile growth. Sounds pretty good, right? The penile length percentile also showed a significant increase at the end of the therapy. Although the older boys fell into lower percentiles than the younger boys, it appears that they showed significant penile catch-up growth. Oxandrolone therapy did not appear to cause testicular growth impairment in the majority of the boys, but in a few there was temporary delay in growth. So not only did you get increase in penis size, but testicle atrophy did not appear that bad, which you might think from, using an anabolic agent for years, are you going to end up with shriveled up testicles for the exchange in penis size growth and muscular growth. So anabolic steroid therapy to promote growth in short children has been used since the late 60s. Now again, keep in mind, this is a 90s study. This is 1990. So stuff that was normal then, when I read this, is not necessarily normal now. Viralization is a side effect of therapy. Clinical trial, they used to use weird shit for certain things, things that made no sense. I think, historically, there were presidents of the United States that were on halo testing for years. There's shit that just didn't really make sense to be prescribed, but it was, and it was justified at the time, given the lack of scope of knowledge around these compounds and whatnot. So let's continue with that in mind. Clinical trials evaluating the effects on genital development are lacking. This report presents clinical observations on the genital development of boys during the therapy of uncomplicated growth retardation with the anabolic steroid Anavar. So keep in mind the context here. This isn't just healthy young men that are developing at a normal rate being given Anavar and then experiencing super physiological penis outcomes. Rather, it is literally stunted stunted growth in order to try and get you back up to baseline. So this is like, I don't know, what's a more relevant example? Let's think of like idiopathic short stature. Lionel Messi, this is a pretty famous one. This is a guy who was going to become shorter than what he otherwise, could have been if he had an adequate amount of growth hormone. Growth hormone deficiency, not a very common thing, but if you are deficient in certain growth pathways, like growth hormone and the downstream growth factor production that comes from that, like IGF-1, you could end up at a much shorter height than you otherwise could have gotten to. And with the deployment of pharmaceutical grade growth hormone and the financial backing of the league that saw the value in him and the potential that he had, they paid for his pharma grade growth hormone and basically got him up to 5'8" or whatever he is as an adult, but he would have never gotten there without the growth hormone and would have ended up probably never becoming the athlete that he is today. So does that kind of a scenario make sense when it comes to Anavar deployment in the youth? Like, you have to keep in mind, and ultimately the overarching takeaway from this, without dissecting this entirely, basically you had individuals who were experiencing growth retardation trying to get back on a normal track to, actual normal development, like a normal child going through puberty. They are not there. So using Anavar to push them through, is that something that would be used nowadays? Highly unlikely. You would probably be using something that is bioidentical and actually replicates endogenous normal patterns of gonadotropin output and or gonadotropin signaling. So for example, testing, testicular response to LH mimic like an HCG. If you did not have enough, gonadotropin output, you could not get it back up to where it should be to actually get enough LH output from the pituitary endogenously, you might try like an HCG. And if that's not working, you have like actual testicular failure or lack of sufficient response, you might use something like a actual bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, because ultimately your body literally takes testosterone, knows exactly what to do with it from an aromatization aspect, 5-alpha reduction aspect. Like, this is the baseline hormone infrastructure that actually provides sexual maturation, sexual differentiation, secondary sexual characteristic development, etc. So you would not be using something like a tissue selective Anavar in a young male in order to try and get him to push through puberty. It just probably wouldn't make much fucking sense, in my opinion. Is there, random weird scenarios where like a low dose Anavar might make sense for SHBG modulation? Yes. In a clinical setting for burn victims, as well as, the androgen sensitive, does it still make sense? Obviously. But for actual like pushing young men through puberty, like, this is not a scenario that is relevant to somebody. Like, in the context of this video, we're basically looking at it as if a normal child who was going through puberty took Anavar, would they experience like heightened penis growth outcomes? No, like, you would probably fuck with things that are going on that actually need to be occurring. If you have a complete lack of adequate androgen receptor signaling, yeah, obviously adding any sort of androgenic activity on top of lackluster activity helps. So if you were, insufficient in DHT production to actually get you through sexual maturation, differentiation, etc., then yeah, like using a tissue selective Anavar at a certain dose, provides another layer of androgenicity, although not great because it's tissue selective, like we mentioned earlier, on top of your baseline hormones. And in addition to that, crushing of SHBG is going to liberate a lot of that bound up DHT that is not actually providing androgenic activity at the tissues like it could be. So, adding a baseline layer of Anavar could increase your free androgen index at the expense of lowering your testosterone production a little bit for sure and suppressing you, but for, a transient period of time or for a long period of time, depending on the Anavar dose, you could have, heightened androgenic activity with this baseline like tissue selective androgenicity as well, on top of your heightened free DHT levels, or proportionally so, free testosterone levels, lowering of estrogen levels from the, suppression of testosterone and the lack of aromatization. You're not going to have heightened outcomes of testosterone production. You're going to have suppressed levels, as mentioned earlier in the video, but you're going to have way less binding proteins that are binding them up. So you could actually increase your overall androgenic burden on your body just by liberating what was bound up initially. Like, if you had a weird like binding protein production issue too, like, yeah, maybe an Anavar like helped liberate some of that and helped push you through with more androgenic activity and less of that DHT bound up by SHBG. But is this, like, again, does this really make sense for the normal average teen? Like, this is a lot of fucking scientific jargon that ultimately is irrelevant, because if you're somebody with a healthy functioning HPTA, you have adequate gonadotropin output from an LH and FSH aspect, your testicles are normal size, they're functioning well, you have normal testosterone levels. Does adding Anavar and potentially suppressing yourself and lowering your SHBG make sense for the average guy? Like, no, you're going to experience hindered outcomes from a neurological context, from a cardiotoxicity context. You may experience actual stunting of certain processes. Now, again, of course, some of the stuff I mentioned from the lowering of SHBG, increasing of, energetic activity from the lowering of SHBG, it sounds all well and good, but if you're not somebody with like a weird binding protein abnormality or somebody with this weird outlier like issue that could be like somewhat band-aided from adding in an Anavar on top, like it's very unlikely you would benefit from like simultaneously I'm going to get muscular growth as well as improved penis length and no negative outcomes. Like that's simply not the case. This is a really old study from decades ago. It is used to try and help individuals who have stunting of growth, not individuals who are normal functioning and are going through puberty at a normal rate. Like you would rather have adequate DHT levels and testosterone levels and estrogen levels circulating in your body at a regulated homeostatic set point than to be introducing Anavar into the equation for years. Like again, this was something that was done for long periods of time. 35 boys with uncomplicated growth retardation were entered into a trial. Mean age was 11 years, 3 months. They were treated with oxandrolone 0.25 milligrams per kilogram per day for a mean of 3.5 years, range of 1 to 7 years. Treatment was discontinued when the previously retarded bone age advanced to be equal to the chronological age. Genital development was assessed every 6 months as well as testicular volume, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, like these individuals, with a kind of like primitive approach to pushing you through puberty were able to achieve, like actual metrics of progress, but it doesn't mean that this is something that should be extrapolated out and applied in a modern setting for healthy individuals whatsoever. So one thing that I should mention as well is in the, like the penis enhancement category, like I've done multiple videos on it in the past. What determines how big your penis grows? Science Explained. This is a good like 5-minute summation if you actually want to know what goes into it during the puberty process that actually determines your length, girth, actual metrics. In addition, we've talked about, shooting testosterone and HGH into your Johnson, what happens, excessive penis bump sessions. We've talked about how to actually grow it through, enhancement practices with pumps, with stretchers, etc. Talked about the outcomes of micropenises with Andrew Huberman here, pseudo-hermaphrodites gaining multiple inches in penis size and getting more jacked than their brothers. Like there are things to understand in the realm of the hormone space that kind of are like very, very overlapping with this topic and discussion and context specific, but it's more of interest and just like interesting tidbits of shit. If you're not an individual who falls into this category, it's essentially irrelevant to you. You don't want to be fucking with your hormones when you're a teenager in order to experience an outcome that is not even something that would be the realistic outcome for you likely. As a teenager who's healthy and functioning, you will likely impair yourself rather than help yourself from the context of what is being discussed in this video. Like this is an article I did a while ago on estrogen's neuroprotective effects as well. And you can basically see when you look at any anabolic androgenic steroid, Anavar included, you're going to have neurotoxicity outcomes at anything above physiologic androgen receptor activation. So you have things like, we have the testosterone treated groups here, we have nandrolone treated groups here, we have winstrol treated groups here, and you can see dose dependent neurotoxicity outcomes. And we find that anything above like physiologic androgenic activity, you are going to be like, there are no anabolic androgenic steroids that are safe from like a neurological perspective. And as well as when you're actually hindering your natural testosterone production through an Anavar deployment, you're going to be inhibiting your estrogen, like neuroprotection, cardioprotection, and actual development as a like fast growing, maturing individual. These are not things you want to be impeding. Like even as an adult, you are going to be hindering yourself from a health aspect when you use this stuff, but especially during the maturation process and development process, preventing yourself from actually reaching like your, adult, normal, like healthy set point, which then, will deteriorate thereafter with anabolic exposure to some extent, but actually preventing yourself from even getting to that healthy baseline and stunting your way on the way there or tangenting it in some weird aberrant fucking way, not something that is ideal. Like neurological outcomes and the permanency of them is such an unexplored area of anabolic steroid use in the youth that it's something that, on top of the possibility of like stunted growth or any of these other things, like that is an area that is one of the most scary and murky, that I would not advise anybody who is a teenager to be fucking with this stuff. Like young teens on tren, like scary shit, dude, that we don't know what kind of permanent effects that may have on them. Like, are you going to die when you use tren as a teenager? Like, no, you can use like grams of shit and not die. Like, yeah, you can fucking take a huge dose of some sort of anabolic androgenic steroid and not have an acute effect, but ultimately the insidious buildup of issues is what is scary with this stuff oftentimes. And people think that just because they don't have an acute effect that they're going to be fine. And it's like, we don't know that you using certain drugs and inhibiting your testosterone production endogenously and other, how many hormones are you fucking with internally when you use this stuff? And then also the progestogenic activity, the weird neurological interactions of using things like 19-nors, like trenbolone. All of this stuff is such like uncharted waters that it's hard to assert that anybody would be like exactly the same using steroids in their youth versus not using steroids in their youth. Are you going to achieve even the same healthy adult baseline once you actually reach like age 25? That's hard to say, man. I don't know for sure. So like for me, especially when it comes to looking at how do you convince somebody to not use Anavar, like not only are you going to probably not get Anavar, but in addition to that, these studies are based on individuals that have stunted growth, not natural, normal functioning, healthy individuals at baseline that are using this to enhance themselves. These are individuals just trying to get to you at baseline. Presumably the majority of you, if you're even a teenager who this would be applicable to, or preteen, like presumably you have natural functions that are good to go. You don't need to fuck with anything. You just need to hit your macros, micros, high quality sleep, physical activity, low stress lifestyle, ideally with, of course, like random stressors in there to actually, develop as a human, but just like a relatively like balanced lifestyle overall. It's not getting into the complications of lifestyle and shit. You know what I mean? Like having a good, healthy lifestyle practices, diet model. You don't need to be using stuff like this. It's not going to help. It's probably going to fuck you over in some capacity down the line. And that isn't even like a scare tactic, to be honest. Like I actually would advise against it because you are likely at best going to be getting some muscle growth outcomes that could otherwise have been probably achieved naturally, given that the majority of people that are haphazardly jumping on this stuff are doing it way too early before they understand this stuff. And then even if they have reached their peak, like I don't really know what kind of impact this is going to have on them neurologically, where you have not even had like your prefrontal cortex fully develop yet. Like I would advise waiting until you are in your 20s at minimum and understanding the shit very thoroughly and having reached your genetic potential, which, to be honest, I don't think takes that long. Like you might be eking out, and when I say that long, years to some people might seem like way too long to wait. But honestly, like to actually dial in the knowledge about this stuff and actually understand endocrinology, pharmacology to the depth that you should before you touch this shit, and even understanding like high quality drugs, like where to even get them, how to source it, what you're even doing with them, something that you don't want to be messing with as a teenager for sure, because the likelihood that all those areas are dialed in is basically zero when you were age like 16 years old or something. So no, you're not going to get a bigger dick when you were using Anavar unless you were an individual who literally had like some major binding protein issue, or you were otherwise stunted to begin with and need something to push you through, or some weird, aberrant, very, very niche, unlikely to occur scenario whereby using an anabolic androgenic steroid on top that would likely be very difficult, near impossible for you to source as a 15-year-old anyways, it's just not the move. So let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. All the comments help the algorithm. They're much appreciated. Like, subscribe, check out my blog, morereplacementdates.com. Follow me on Instagram, @replacementdates, Facebook, Snapchat, Twitter, TikTok, Apple Podcasts. Check out Chris Bell, Big Strong Fast on Instagram, as well as his documentary I mentioned. And if you want to support me, you can check out anything I'm associated with. The video description below, Merrick Health, probably the most notable, relevant, video description thing I have for this topic of discussion specifically. If you are a developing teen and you have, you want to check your blood work and actually see if you have some sort of issue and you have some sort of speculation that something's wrong, blood work is very, very useful and can actually figure out some of this stuff. Like if you had a triple-digit SHBG level for seemingly no reason and, you had stunted growth outcomes, actually deferring to somebody who's a specialist in endocrinology and getting elaborate interpretation of your current hormone interactions and whatnot could be warranted. You know, the likelihood that you're a viable candidate for some sort of therapy is unlikely, but it's if you're one of the hyper outlier scenario individuals, like assessing a pituitary defect or something, like for Drifter. If you guys saw the Drifter video we did, he found out he had like a benign pituitary adenoma, if I recall correctly. Or the individual on the doctor's TV show that we talked about on the channel, I think his name was Brandon Westfall, and he had a HPTA issue. I believe it was, I forget exactly what it was. I think it was a pituitary adenoma as well, and it prevented him from going through puberty properly. And he was like in his late 20s and hadn't actually gone through full sexual maturation yet. Like, these are things that are very fucking rare, but could be diagnosed through actual bloods and subsequent like imaging and whatnot to see if something's abnormal. But also, if you're just an adult who wants to assess your hormone balance and see if anything's wrong or awry, and if there's anywhere to optimize, even from a natural perspective, not just, you know, accounting for actual hormone intervention, it's definitely worthwhile to get a blood panel if you're natural, if you're enhanced, whatever the fuck it is. Getting baseline blood work, I cannot stress the importance enough. Even if you are a natural, never wanting to touch any sort of drug guy, assessing where you're at, so if something goes awry in the future, you can then look back on that blood work and assess what went wrong. Super critical in my opinion, definitely worthwhile. So you can check it out, Merrick Health, link in the description below. Anything else I'm associated with, it's down there. Thank you guys for watching. Talk to you soon.